With this handout and with these movies, we introduce you, or rather reintroduce you, to elements pertaining to form. We will speak about the sentence, the period, a few words about hybrid forms, binary forms, and ternary forms. To begin with, just a few words about form and shape. This is one point that I remember coming upon years ago, and that is our Latin word forma includes in it not only the notions of shape that we associate with the English word form, but in Latin there's an aspect, there's a part of form that also pertains to beauty. And to me, that's very suggestive. So, in some ways, to understand, to study, to dig into, to try to appreciate the form of a piece is a means of coming to know, understand, and appreciate its beauty. And I just find that so very, as I say, so very suggestive, so very powerful. When we study form ourselves here in our class, we're going to concern ourselves primarily with how phrases are related, how sections are related. We'll give some thought to how individual forms differ, and also to how individual pieces differ that are examples of the same form. Let us first introduce you to a form type known as the sentence. Here are the basics of the sentence. Your standard sentence contains two phrases, but only one cadence, and that cadence will be found at the end of the second phrase. Your textbook sentence is 8 bars long and contains two 4-bar phrases. The first phrase, the first textbook 4-bar phrase, is called the presentation. It contains a 2-bar basic idea and a repetition of the basic idea. The repetition is usually on another pitch level. So, for instance, the opening basic idea might move from tonic to dominant. You can see how I symbolize tonic and dominant with bold-faced T's and D's. So the basic idea opens to begin with, 2-bar basic idea. Then the repetition of the basic idea might be on a different pitch level. It might move, the original basic idea might move from tonic to dominant. The repetition, on the other hand, might move from dominant to tonic. So much for the first phrase. That's called the presentation phrase. Your second phrase is called the continuation phrase. And the continuation phrase of a sentence may be marked by any of the following three things, the following three procedures, any one or any combination of them. Well, your continuation phrase may contain fragmentations and sequences of the basic idea. So fragmentation, sequences, and it may be marked by harmonic acceleration, meaning simply that the chords will change at a faster rate. So again, three aspects of continuation function are harmonic acceleration, fragmentation of the basic idea, and sequences. Those three things. At the end of the continuation phrase, there will be a cadence. It may be a half cadence, it may be a perfect authentic cadence. I suppose it could be an IAC, an imperfect authentic cadence. But the two really to remember are half cadence or perfect authentic cadence. Now it is true that sometimes two sentences will combine to form a 16-bar period. And in just a second, we'll talk about the period. All the same, within the 16-bar period composed of two sentences, each 8-bar unit, that is the antecedent and the consequent, will still consist of the standard parts of a sentence. So once again, a sentence. Your textbook sentence is 8 bars long, 2 4-bar phrases. The first phrase is called the presentation phrase, in which you have a 2-bar basic idea, a 2-bar unit that is more or less relatively identifiable. 2-bar basic idea, followed by a repetition of that basic idea, typically on a different pitch level. Then, in your continuation phrase, you may find any one of these procedures or any combination of them. You may find fragmentations of the basic idea. You may find sequences. You may find harmonic acceleration. Look at the end of the continuation phrase for a cadence, a half cadence, or a perfect authentic cadence. Now, for the period. Some basics about the period. Well, your standard period contains 2 phrases, each of which ends with a cadence. Your textbook period will be 8 bars long and will contain 2 4-bar phrases. Probably sounds familiar, doesn't it? Doesn't that sound somewhat like the structure of a sentence? Well, the period and the sentence are very different structures, very different theme types. As for the period, the first phrase is called the antecedent, and it contains a 2-bar basic idea. So again, so far, notice the resemblance to the sentence. Antecedent phrase begins with a 2-bar basic idea. But now, the antecedent will continue. After the basic idea, you will find a 2-bar contrasting idea. So something different here. The antecedent is marked at its end by a comparably weak cadence, most often a half cadence. All right? Your second phrase of the period is called the consequent. Most consequent phrases resemble their antecedents. They may begin with a repetition of antecedent material. That repetition may be an octave higher or lower. That's no big deal. The consequent may begin with slight variation of the antecedent material. Maybe it's ornamented in some way. Who knows? Maybe by neighbor tones, maybe by some sort of other ornament, maybe trills. And then the consequent phrase may begin with material that resembles the gesture of the antecedent, but which begins on a higher or lower pitch level. The cadence at the end of the consequent is the more conclusive one of the two. Most often it is a perfect authentic cadence. So, very important it is to grasp that we have a progression in cadential conclusiveness in a period. A progression from weak to strong. Your antecedent phrase ends with a weaker cadence, most often a half cadence. Your consequent phrase ends with a stronger cadence, most often a perfect authentic cadence. So, big difference between sentences and period. Sentence contains 1 cadence at its end. Your period contains 2 cadences, 1 midway through and then 1 at the end. There's a progression in a period in cadential strength from weak to strong. A few words, just very quickly, about parallel and contrasting periods. I'm not going to make a big deal of this for reasons that we might bring out along the way, but I thought I would mention these terms to you, since you've probably heard them before. In a parallel period, the 2 phrases, the antecedent and the consequent, begin in the same way or very similarly. In a contrasting period, the 2 phrases begin differently. Contrasting periods are less common than parallel periods, and according to William Kaplan, many, or perhaps most, so-called contrasting periods are better understood as hybrid themes that combine aspects of both the period and the sentence. So you can have the 2 together. Now, the antecedents and consequent phrases of a period may be symmetric, meaning simply that they'll have the same number of phrase measures, 4 bars plus 4 bars, 2 bars plus 2 bars, 8 bars plus 8 bars, symmetric. Or the phrases, the antecedent and the consequent, may be asymmetric, meaning that they don't have the same number of bars, in which case the second phrase is usually the longer of the two. I won't even get into three-phrase period, although I have the information about it on your handout here. But let me end this movie here with a word or two about hybrid themes. As I said, these combine aspects of both the period and the sentence. You may be interested in looking at the footnote that I've included at this point in the handout here, because I've given you an example of a theme type that Kaplan does identify as a hybrid theme. But let me say about this. Don't worry about these combination themes, these hybrid themes for now. What I'd really like you to get clear in your mind is the distinction between the sentence and the period. And in fact, now would be a good time for you to look at the sentence or period pre-assignment. So please, right now, take a look at that.